Welcome to the last week of Greatest Hits. We're just talking about those scriptures, those verses in your life that are like those key verses. Those are ones that you play over and over again in your head. Now, we're going to wrap that up today with what I think is probably the verse we need to hear the most in our culture. But before we do that, I want to I just need a couple of... Now I'm better. Okay. Next week, we want to give you both a promo and a warning. Next week is a series called Insatiable. And what we are going to be talking about is what's happening in our culture right now when it comes to sex. Like right now in our culture, it is constantly sex. Sex has always been kind of a headline, but right now it is a big thing. And we want to talk about that from God's perspective. Here's what we want to know. No matter what kind of background you come from, how does God feel about Bruce Jenner or Caitlyn Jenner? How does God feel about what's happening in our culture? What has God called us to? Both his heart and what he cares about. So we're going to be talking about that. Now, here's our warning. It's going to be kind of rated R. It's not like PG-13. It's kind of rated R. We're going to talk about some stuff that you may not want your kids to be involved in. So if you're going to pick a week for your kids to make sure they're over in Upstreet, that's going to be the week, okay? I normally say it because I talk about sex with my kids at a pretty young age and stuff like that. This may be something I don't even have my fifth grader in here for. Like, I may make sure he's over there. So it's intense if I'm worried about it for my own kids. So anyway, just want to give you a little promo there. Today we're wrapping up Greatest Hits. I've been trying to bring in your greatest hits. I've been trying to look for that verse. So we put it out on there on Facebook, and we said, hey, just let us know. Like, what is the verse in your life that has meant everything to you? And I was looking through there. Here's what I was looking for. Just that one verse that, man, every Christian needs to hear and change their life. Everybody needs to focus their life on when they hear that verse. And it came down to this one. When I read this, I went, yep. That's it. That's the verse that needs to play through everybody's head. Luke 9:23, Jesus said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will save it." That verse is something that should direct every bit of our life. And let me tell you why that's so important. Because as people, we come out of the womb really, really selfish. That's just who we are, right? Yesterday I was at an Olive Garden. We were having a fancy Italian dinner. And we were in the lobby area waiting, and it was about a 35-minute wait. So we were sitting there waiting, my family and I. And there were like these 8 or 9-year-old kids that were sitting there in the chairs. Now, there's not very many chairs. Most people are standing, but there's a few chairs. These 8 or 9-year-old kids have all migrated to there because that's what you do when you're an 8 or 9-year-old kid. You're only thinking about how you fulfill your basic needs, right? So they're like, hey, there's a chair. So they all went and sat down on those chairs. In the process, while we were standing there, this older family came in. There's 3 of them. And one lady was really old. I would guess she was probably close to her 90s. She came in. We practically had to shoo people away to get a seat for her, right? She sat down, but then the people that were with her, also old, were standing next to her. And finally, these 8 or 9-year-old kids left. Finally, they got up. And there were all these other kids from homecoming that were standing around, these teenagers. The obvious choice is these 8, 9-year-old kids who probably should sit on the ground, because when you're 8 or 9, seen, not heard, right? You should have been sitting on the ground. Anyway, they get up and leave. And so everybody, at least what I'm thinking is, everybody's like, oh, finally a seat for this older couple that's with this older lady that they're with. And immediately all these kids from homecoming are like, oh my goodness, and they grab a seat and they all plop down. And I guess I'm getting old and crotchety, but I was like, never wanted to grab a girl in her homecoming dress by her hair and drag her out of the more in my life. Never felt like that before. Anyway, I was just like, that's who we are as people, like, right? How do I get my needs met? How do I feel happy? How do I feel complete? If there's an opportunity, I think about that all the time when I'm parking, right? It's like we're always hunting for that parking spot. What I think is funny is the people that park really close to the front of the store when they go to the gym. I've seen people like circling, trying to find a place that's up close so they can go get on a treadmill and run for 30 minutes, right? Anyway, we're just trying to think about how we can get our basic needs met, but it's not just seating, it's not just parking. We carry that over into sex, which is what we're going to talk about next week. We view sex selfishly. We view everything in this life because we want to be happy. We want ourselves to be fulfilled, and we want it to all be about us. And in a culture where every person on the planet grows up, and here's how bad it is. We grow up, and we know that's wrong, right? We know that we shouldn't be selfish, and we should give old people the seats and that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, you know what we switch to? It's better, but it's not the best. We switch to this world where we start doing things that make us feel good. And we're not necessarily giving the chair away because it's what's best for them. We're giving the chair away because it makes us feel good. We don't really care whether the person at the stop sign who's asking for money, whether we're helping or not. We just give them the money so we can make ourselves feel good. It doesn't really matter whether we're helping them or not. We just want to make ourselves feel good. And in a world where even where we're trying to be good, selfish people, Jesus comes in and says, the goal of your faith is to be crucified. That's what you're supposed to do. If you want to be my disciple, you're going to be like somebody you've never seen before. You are going to pick up your cross, and you're going to follow after me. The goal of your faith isn't to feel happy and satisfied, and it sure isn't to become healthy and wealthy. The goal of your faith is for you to end up crucified. And I can tell you, I just want to get that out there because Jesus doesn't make any sense if you don't understand this as the goal of your faith. The Bible doesn't make any sense if this is not the goal of your faith. Nothing that you will do when you pray, when God allows things to happen in your life, nothing's going to make sense unless you understand that the objective of your faith is to end up on a cross. So you might be thinking, okay, good. What is a cross? What do you mean by that? What does Jesus mean when he says, pick up your cross and follow after me? What does he mean by a cross? Does he mean a literal cross? Well, for the disciples, that's what he literally meant. For his disciples at his time, he literally meant that because many of the people that he was talking to ended up dying on a cross. But that's just the only thing he's talking about. He's talking about your life, your approach to life, everything that you could get in life. I just want to take it and turn it around. And a cross for you looks like this. I just want to spend the day talking about what a cross looks like. A cross is this. A cross is voluntary. Need to understand that, okay? A cross is not something bad that happens to you. And we all have stuff that happens to us that's bad, right? Like some of you had terrible home situations. You had a mom that didn't love you. You had a father that was absent. Maybe you grew up in a really bad situation. Maybe you were poor. Maybe you were from Ohio. Something bad. You had no control over it. It's just happened to you, And that just happens in your life. There's something you don't have control over. That is a trial that you go through. And we have them today. Some of you on your way home, maybe you're going to run out of gas or you're going to have a flat tire. That is not your cross. That's just a trial that you're going through. And if you didn't catch it, a couple weeks ago, we talked about how important those are to our faith. It's important for us. James chapter 1, this is on our greatest hits, right? Consider it pure joy when we face trials of many kinds because you know the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Right? That's what we're supposed to do when we face trials, and those grow up your faith. That's not what a cross is. A cross is something you go out of your way to choose to do. You take that step. It says it right there. Jesus says, Luke 9:23, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. This is a choice, and it's not just a one-time choice. This is a choice to volunteer for God over and over and over again. We would get nothing done around here if people didn't over and over and over choose to give up, to volunteer, and carry their cross. And Jesus is putting crosses before you, but listen, he's not going to make you do it. This is not something he will force you to do. And if you keep praying and you keep waiting and you keep expecting God to hand you the greatest assignment of your life, it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen because it's something that you have to choose to do. In fact, you have probably let these assignments, these crosses go by you in your life. And Jesus is saying, there's one. There's an opportunity. There's an opportunity for you to follow me. There's an opportunity for you to pick up your cross. There's an opportunity for you to model what I've done in your life and die for people. But we miss it because we don't want to volunteer. We don't want to step up. I mean, yeah, we'll endure trial, but we're not going to take it to that next level where we raise our hand and volunteer to get into the hot mess. But that's just what Jesus is asking us to do. Second thing, a cross is a voluntary sacrifice, right? A sacrifice, by definition, is something that costs you something. Something that costs you something. You can't sacrifice something that doesn't cost you anything, right? If one of you walked in here today and you found $5 laying on the floor and you're like, hey, my offering. I mean, yeah, it's probably better that you did that than just keep it. But that doesn't really become a sacrifice to you. I mean, it can be an offering, but it can't really be a sacrifice to you because it was never really yours to begin with. Jesus is calling us to really sacrifice our lives. And this is the goal of our faith, to sacrifice our life. Romans chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, in other words, because he sacrificed his life for you, because he gave mercy to you, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. I love to sing on Sunday mornings, don't get me wrong. And sometimes I get really into it, and I connect with God when we sing on Sunday mornings, and that is a form of worship. But if you aren't living your life, offering your body as a sacrifice, then those words, I don't care how much you get into it, I don't care how emotional you get into it, I don't care how dramatic it is for you, it's worthless. It's worthless unless your life is a sacrifice. And if your life is a sacrifice, then that is worship. But real worship starts with, doesn't end here, but it starts with us sacrificing or offering our bodies as a sacrifice to God. It has to cost you something. Listen, when we started doing work over at the church, we knew it was going to take a lot of volunteers, but it was going to take more than that. It was going to take a lot of volunteers with a lot of sacrifice. And man, if you've been over there lately, that building, I just walk in there and I just can't believe how much has gotten done. I can't believe we're moving into the Taylor lanes and so much is happening and transpired. And all of that has happened. All of that has happened. Not one little bit of that hasn't happened because of somebody's sacrifice. It is directly connected. Maybe you sacrificed money. When we went through the campaign and we sacrificed, we all got together and we said, okay, we're all in. We need to do this. We need $475,000. Let's pull together. You made a sacrifice. Some people withheld and they go, I don't know. I don't have money for that. That might hurt. Well, that's the whole point of it. That's what a sacrifice is. Some of you jumped in to volunteer over there and you went over there. And I can tell you, I'm standing there on a Saturday morning and listen, nobody wants to be there. There's nobody on a Saturday morning that woke up and said, man, I want to be here on a Saturday morning at church, pounding boards together and like hitting my thumb with a hammer. I want that to happen. Nobody woke up and did that. When I'm there, I realize that nobody is here who isn't picking up their cross, who isn't making a sacrifice of time in their life. That's how the kingdom of God works, and without that sacrifice, nothing happens. Next one. A cross is a voluntary sacrifice that hurts. I almost didn't put this part in here, but I think this is really important. You got to understand, it hurts. When God calls you to do something, when he tells you to pick up your cross and follow after, when you sacrifice your life, when you're following the example of somebody who was crucified, it's going to hurt. And this is the opposite of our mission in life, isn't it? Isn't our mission in life to avoid hurt? Isn't our mission in life to get out of situations that might, and not even for sure, but just might end up in a situation where we experience hurt? And into that, Jesus says, pick up your cross and follow after me. Sacrifice what you have, sacrifice your life, do it voluntarily, and when you do it, it's going to hurt. We say it all the time around here, carrying your cross hurts. There's times where it's going to hurt, and it's funny, it happens in a lot of little ways most of the time. It's not the big hurt, it's just the little hurt. I don't know if many people know this. The person who was up here dancing with me today, to my right, was my son. That's my 17-year-old son, in case you were like, who's he? He's my 17-year-old son. We needed a fifth, and he was at the house at the time, so I was like, and might I add, turned out to be the best dancer of any of us. Who would have known the 17-year-old would be better than the 40-year-old guys? But anyway, he was up here, and I asked him to do it. He's like, oh, yeah, sure, I'll do that. So we rehearsed it a few times and everything, and then just the way it worked out, the only way for us to rehearse this morning for our last rehearsal was we had to come in this morning at 7 o'clock, which means we had to wake up at 6 o'clock, and he had worked late last night, and so he went to bed late last night, and I had to go wake him up. So it was 6 o'clock in the morning. I opened the door. Everybody out in the house, dead to sleep in the house on a Sunday morning. I walk in there, and I jerk on his toe, and I'm like, hey, time to pick up your cross and follow me. I don't know if he even remembers it, but that's what I said to him. Because that's what it is. Sometimes it's just waking up on a Sunday morning when you don't want to wake up on a Sunday morning or a Saturday morning or a late night. Sometime when you're just like, man, I want that evening. I can't tell you how frustrated I am the day that we decided that Growth Track, which we do every week, Growth Track should be on Sunday afternoons because that's the best time for people to everything in my sinful nature was crying inside because I was going, football. I'm going to go home after Sunday morning, and then I'm going to come back and teach Growth Track right when the second game start ending, right during that fourth quarter, right? But that's the sacrifice is over, and they're little things. They're little things. But I tell you what, the little things scare off people. You know how many people? We have about 800 people that come on a weekend here to church. Do you know the most that we've ever had working over at the other building? Most we've ever had in one time is 65 people. Now, that's not like a whole guilt trip I'm laying on everybody. Okay, it is. But I'm just like, man, we can get 800 people on a Sunday morning to come and do what? Essentially nothing, right? You're doing nothing. You're just coming and you're sitting here, right? But then when it's like, man, let's sacrifice. Let's pick up our cross. Let's follow after him. Then it gets a little tougher. I didn't look at the contributions, but there's the same ratio when it comes to, hey, we're gonna move into this new bowling alley. How many people are excited about moving into the bowling alley? I'm sure if I would have said that a minute ago, everybody in here would have clapped, right? Everybody's excited about moving into the bowling alley, but what were the ratios on the sacrifices? I'm sure it was probably sort of the same. Of a church of 800 people, there's a core group of about 65 to 100 that are making the heavy sacrifice. Why? Because it hurts. And sometimes it's the little hurt that scares people away. And Jesus is saying, I've not called you to just get up early, to just volunteer over an up street, to get up early on a Sunday morning. I haven't just called you to go volunteer at a building. I haven't called you to just get outside. I've called you to do some really intense stuff. And if the little hurt that we're trying to avoid in our life is scaring us off, here's the thing. This is just straight up truth. We're going to miss the really awesome stuff that God wants to do in our life because we can't even get over the little stuff because God's called us to the big hurt. He's called us to really lay down our lives and sacrifice for him. I don't want you to ever misunderstand that like this church is about me or anything. Our family, though, has just kind of gone through something where we ended up with it experiencing hurt. Like we really felt like God was calling us to adoption. So many of you know this story. We felt like God was calling us to adoption. We prayed about it. We went through the process. We prayed about the child that was going to be placed in our home. And finally about a year ago, we got this 1-month-old Azalea in our house. And we were like, okay, God. And we knew there was a risk. We knew there was a chance that this might result in hurt. But we did it anyway because we were like, that's what God has called us to do. And so we went through this whole year thinking, okay, we're going to adopt her. Hopefully it looked like it was going to be that way at one time. And then this past summer they came and said the parents have complied with most of what they're supposed to do, and so it looks like she's going to be going back. And even when they said that, we were like, Yeah, I don't know, though. We prayed about it, and we felt like God was calling us to it, and we don't know if God's going to let us go through something like that, so we just kept praying about it, and just last week, we went to court, and they said, she's going back. And we just couldn't believe it. We were still sitting there going, I was still praying. I was like, God, just let her, I know it sounds terrible to you guys, but let her biological parents run over by a bus. I mean, it's not hard for you, God. Why? Because she shouldn't be with her biological parents? No, she shouldn't be with her biological parents. They're horrible people. And I was thinking, our home's better. God, why wouldn't you answer this prayer? And we knew it might end up in hurt. But I had a hard time picturing what happened Friday, where the caseworker came over to the house. And they just packed her up and drove away. And we just sat there, and we hurt. And I'm here to tell you that's exactly the kind of sacrifice that Jesus has called us to. And I didn't regret any part of that decision because I knew it was my voluntary sacrifice. It was my form of worship, and that's what he's called us to do. Pick up your cross and follow after him. And if you're afraid to adopt because it might end up in hurt, you're no better than some kids that are standing in an Olive Garden waiting for their seat that take an old lady's seat. That's who God has called us to be. A cross is a voluntary sacrifice that hurts. 2 Timothy 2 says this, so do not be ashamed of the testimony about our Lord or of me, his prisoner. Rather, join with me in suffering for the gospel by the power of God. Suffering for the gospel, not mildly being inconvenienced, not going through a box of Kleenexes. Join with me in suffering for the gospel. What's he saying? He's saying, pick up your cross and follow after Jesus. He's called us to experience that hurt. And I'll tell you, it's in those moments, I think, where your faith grows stronger. It was in that moment on Friday where we were hurt and nobody even said anything. I've never been in a situation where she drove away and we didn't hurt anything. And the only thing that popped into my head was I just said, she's with God now. And in those moments, if I didn't experience that hurt and I wasn't together with our family, we wouldn't have had to dig down that much deeper in our faith. A cross is that voluntary sacrifice. But listen, it just doesn't end there. It's not just experiencing hurt for the sake of hurt. What's the point? A cross is a voluntary sacrifice that hurts and leads people to God, right? This is why the monks don't make any sense. There was this fad several hundred years ago where the monks were like, yes, we want to suffer for Jesus. And so they would go live in caves and stuff. And one guy was like, yeah, I want to suffer for Jesus. So he got up and he lived on a pole. And that's just where he lived. And people would bring him food, and he was miserable, and he was just experiencing suffering for the sake of Christ. There was one monk that would let the parasites that grew in his armpits and stuff like that, he would let them grow so that he could experience sacrificing for Christ. And you're reading that, and you're like, what a bunch of morons, right? I'm not just talking about sacrifice for the sake of sacrifice, hurt for the sake of hurt. The point of it is that you hurt, that you sacrifice for the same reason that Jesus gave up his life, for another human being, so that you could lead them closer to God. 1 Peter reminds us of the reason that Jesus gave up his life. He says, for Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. That's why he died for you. That's why he sacrificed his life for you. That's why he gave up everything for you. The hurt that he experienced was so that you could know God. And he has called us to the exact same thing. So, what are you voluntarily sacrificing in your life? What are you voluntarily sacrificing that hurts in your life? And how is someone growing closer to God because of it? And you might be like, wow, that's too heavy from where I'm at. Maybe you just walked in the door and you're like, I don't know. Listen, Jesus was talking to people when he said this. He was talking to a lot of people that didn't even believe in him yet. Like, it might be your first time ever coming to church, and you've always felt like there's something a little off by church. And you might have been like, yeah, that all sounds good, but there still seems something that's a little off. My bet is this is the part that's off. And people gave you all the hope and the blah, 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 and the fluffy stuff, but they never really told you what Jesus has called us to do. And it's only through that really difficult stuff do you get to experience God's true power and grace, and do you really draw closer to him? Jesus says this again in a different place, and he says it in a different way. Matthew 10:38, whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Let me be clear. It's something you volunteer to do. You pick it up. He's not going to make you do it. But I want you to know, it's not optional. This is how we follow Jesus. This is how we live by his example. If I could put it this way, I just want you to think about what your cross is. Right now, as I've been talking, I can guarantee you in your head, there's something you've been thinking. Maybe it's just the sacrifice of living your life for him. Maybe it's a sacrifice that you need to make. Maybe it's a small sacrifice. Maybe God's been calling you to volunteer at LifeBridge or over at Upstreet or do something at the building or give money towards the campaign or whatever it is. Maybe it's small. Maybe it's huge. Maybe God's been calling you to adopt for a long time. You've been running from it. Maybe God's been calling you into the ministry. Maybe God's been calling you to make a big sacrifice, and you've been going, nah, that seems wrong. That seems uncomfortable. Here, let me tell you what Jesus is saying. Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. He's saying this. Pick it up! Let me pray for you.